Two women underestimated her. In the same house, one mocked her to her face. The other, the one who was supposed to protect her, smiled and did worse. Her name was Zara. 3 years into her marriage, she let her husband's mistress flaunt a pregnancy in her garden, and she let her own mother-in-law call her too simple to keep a man without saying a single word in her own defense. Not because she was weak, because she knew something neither of them did. The house they were standing in, the name they thought they were protecting, the comfort they thought they were entitled to, all of it belonged to her. Not her husband, her. On the afternoon this story truly begins, Zara was sitting quietly on the veranda of that house, a house nobody believed belonged to her, while a young woman named Vivian walked across the compound in a dress the color of arrogance, one hand resting on a belly swollen with a child that was not Zara's, and said, loudly enough for the gardener, the driver, and God himself to hear, "Enjoy watching from the outside, madame. This house will be mine soon. A woman like you was only ever going to keep it warm for someone better." Zara did not answer. She simply smiled, the smile of a woman who knows something the room does not. Because in exactly 9 days, Vivian would stand in the very spot she was standing in now, not laughing, not glowing, not setting, but on her knees in the driveway, begging a woman she had mocked for the price of a taxi fare back to a life she no longer had. And she would not be the only one who fell. In the next 2 hours, you're going to watch both of these women lose everything they mocked her for having. And you're going to understand exactly why the quietest woman in the room is usually the one you should be watching the closest. This is the story of what happens when a mistress and a mother-in-law both bet against the wrong woman and both lost. But to understand the fall, you must first understand the woman who let herself be underestimated and why. Zara Adeyemi was raised in a house with too many windows and not enough noise. Her father, Chief Adeyemi, had built one of the country's largest logistics and shipping empires from nothing but a bicycle and a stubborn refusal to be told no. By the time Zara was 10 years old, the family name opened doors before she even knocked on them. Drivers waited outside her school, her uniforms were tailored, her name, when spoken in certain rooms, made grown men sit up straighter. But her father had one rule, delivered to her not as a suggestion, but as a commandment carved into the walls of her childhood. Never let money choose your friends. Never let money choose your husband. Let them choose you first, when you have nothing to give them but yourself. So, Zara grew up learning to disappear in plain sight. She wore modest clothes. She drove herself when she could in an old car that coughed twice before starting. She avoided the events where her father's name would be printed beside hers on a golden invitation card. She learnt, quietly, patiently, the family business, the ships, the warehouses, the numbers, because her father had no son and she was her only heir, though almost nobody outside the family's inner circle knew it. To the world, Zara was simply Zara, a soft-spoken woman who worked in logistics, kind to strangers, faithful at church, the kind of woman aunties pointed to and said, "See how humble she still is, even though her family has something small." Small. That was the word people used. They had no idea. It was at her cousin's wedding that she met David. He was not wealthy. He was not particularly ambitious. He worked as a mid-level manager at an import company, the kind of company, coincidentally, that occasionally did business with the very empire David didn't know Zara would one day inherit. He was handsome in an easy, unthreatening way, quick to laugh, quicker to compliment. He noticed her sitting alone near the back of the reception hall, away from the dance floor, nursing a glass of Chapman she wasn't really drinking. "You look like someone who's counting the minutes until she can leave," he said. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised her. "Is it that obvious?" Only to someone doing the same thing. They talked for 3 hours that night, about nothing important, about everything important. Zara did not tell him her father's name. She told him she worked in logistics, family business, nothing special. David, for his part, told her about his dreams of one day owning his own trading company, his mother's health struggles, his fear of dying unremarkable. She liked that he didn't perform for her. She liked, more than anything, that he had no idea who she really was, because for the first time in her adult life, she felt chosen for herself and not for what her surname could open. They dated for 11 months. He proposed on a beach at sunset, nervous, sweating through his shirt, holding a ring he had saved 4 months' salary to buy. "I don't have much to give you, Zara," he said, kneeling in the sand, "but I will walk every day of my life to give you more." She said yes with tears in her eyes, not because of the ring, but because of the sentence before it. "I don't have much to give you." He meant it, and she loved him for meaning it. She never told her father the full truth of how humble David's proposal had been. Her father would have scoffed, would have insisted on a colossal wedding, a merger of families, cameras, headlines. Instead, Zara asked for a small ceremony, a private ceremony, a modest budget. She told her father this was what David wanted. It was not. It was what she wanted, for the marriage to begin honestly, before the money could ever enter the room and change how it was measured. Her father, seeing the peace in his daughter's eyes, allowed it. But before the wedding, he took her hands in his and said something she would carry for the rest of her life. "I will not tell him who you are. That is your choice to make, and yours alone when the time is right. But Zara, a man who marries a woman believing she has little and later discovers she has much will show you who he truly is in that very moment. Watch him closely when the truth finally comes, not before." Zara married David in a small chapel with 40 guests, wearing a dress she chose herself from a shop 3 streets from her childhood home. And for the first 3 years, it was, by every account, a good marriage. Quiet, warm, unremarkable in the way peaceful things often are. David did not know his wife owned in trust 31% of one of the largest shipping conglomerates in the country. He did not know the modest 3-bedroom house they eventually moved into, the one he believed he was slowly paying off, had in fact been purchased outright by Zara's father as a wedding gift, held quietly in Zara's name alone. He believed he was the provider. She let him believe it, because she remembered her father's words, and she was watching, patiently, the way her father had built his empire, brick by brick, without needing anyone to applaud the foundation. She had no idea, in those early peaceful years, just how important that patience would become. There was, however, one person who never quite warmed to Zara's quiet ways, Mama Beatrice. From the very first meeting, Mama Beatrice had looked Zara up and down the way a market woman inspects fruit she suspects is bruised underneath. "She is very simple," she told David privately after their introduction, in a tone that made the word simple sound like an accusation. "Are you sure this is the kind of wife that will help you rise, my son? A man needs a wife who pushes him forward, not one who is content to sit quietly in a corner." David had laughed it off at the time. "Mama, that's exactly why I love her. She doesn't want anything from me but me. Mama Beatrice had said nothing further that day, but she remembered the words. And she was the kind of woman who did not forget what she had decided about a person on first sight. She only waited for the world to prove her right. The cracks did not arrive with thunder. They arrived the way most betrayals do, quietly, in the small print of a marriage, in the spaces between what was said and what was true. It began with David's promotion. His company sent him on a 6-month project overseeing a new supply route, based 2 cities away. Zara, ever supportive, encouraged him to take it. "It's your dream," she told him. "I'll manage things here." She did not know that on his 2nd week at the new posting, David met Vivian. Vivian was 26, sharp-tongued, magnetic in the particular way of women who have learned that confidence photographs better than kindness. She worked as a client relations officer at the same firm. She laughed loudly at David's jokes, louder than Zara ever had, though not because they were funnier, but because Vivian understood instinctively that men mistake volume for adoration. It started as coffee after work, then dinners disguised as client meetings. Then within 4 months, David had done something he would spend the rest of his life failing to properly explain, not just to Zara, but to himself. He did not fall into the affair. He walked into it, slowly, with his eyes open, telling himself a different lie every week to make the walking easier. "It's just company. It's just innocent. It's just because I'm lonely out here. It's just until the project ends." By month 5, Vivian was pregnant. David came home for a weekend visit 3 weeks later, and Zara, who had spent those months managing the house, checking in on her aging father, quietly overseeing a shipment crisis at the company under a signature that was not her own, noticed something different in her husband. A distance, a guilt he wore like cologne, thinking it was invisible. She did not ask him directly, not yet. Instead, she did what her father had taught her to do with any problem worth solving properly. She watched and she gathered facts, quietly, without alarm, without accusation, because a woman who confronts a lie before she has the full truth only teaches the liar to lie better. It took her 6 weeks to find out everything, the name, the dates, the pregnancy. She learnt it in the end, not through spies or drama, but from a careless voice note David forgot to delete from a shared family tablet. Vivian's voice, giddy, saying, "When are you telling your wife, baby? I want to start planning the naming ceremony." Zara sat with that voice note for 3 days before she said a single word to her husband. She did not cry in front of anyone. She cried once, alone, in the bathroom with the tap running so that the sound would not travel, not because she was weak, but because some grief is too private to be witnessed, even by God. Then she dried her face and she waited for David to come home, and she asked him the only question that mattered. "Is there something you need to tell me?" David's face, when she asked, told her everything before his mouth caught up. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the same table where they had eaten 1,000 ordinary dinners, and he did not deny it. He simply exhaled, the way a man exhales when a weight he has been carrying secretly finally becomes visible to someone else. "Zara, He stopped, started again. "It's not what you think." "I don't think anything, David. I know. Tell me the truth and tell it to me once, properly, because I will not ask twice." So he told her about Vivian, about the loneliness of the posting, about how it started small and became something he didn't know how to stop. And then he said the sentence that Zara would replay in her mind years afterward. The sentence that revealed to her more than any affair could, exactly who her husband was underneath the 11 months of courtship and 3 years of marriage. "It was a mistake, Zara. I'm sorry. I never planned this. Zara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, calmly, in a voice that did not shake, "A mistake is spilling a drink, David. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. What you did took months. It took dinners. It took lies you had to construct one on top of another every single day to keep me from finding out. You didn't stumble into a mistake. You built one, brick by brick, the same way you build anything you actually intend to keep standing." David had no answer for that, because she was right. And some part of him, the part still capable of shame, knew it. "She's pregnant," Zara continued, though it was not a question. "You're going to have a child with her." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Zara felt something in her chest that she did not expect. Not just heartbreak, but a strange, cold clarity. Her father's voice returned to her unbidden. Watch him closely when the truth finally comes, not before. She was watching now, and what she saw was a man scrambling to justify himself, not a man falling to his knees in genuine remorse. He apologized, the way people apologize when they got caught, not sorry for what they did. "What do you want to do?" she asked him quietly. "I don't want to lose you," David said quickly, too quickly. "I made a mistake, but I don't want to lose everything we built. Please, Zara, give me a chance to fix this." Everything we built. She almost laughed at the phrase, though nothing about the moment was funny. He believed he had built this life. He believed the house, the comfort, the small stability of their marriage was his doing, his provision, his kingdom to protect. He had no idea he was asking to keep a house he had never actually paid for, married to a woman whose family could purchase his entire company without noticing the expense. And in that moment, watching him beg to keep what he did not know he had never truly held, Zara made a decision. She would not explode. She would not scream or throw him out that night or call her father in tears demanding vengeance. That was not her way. And more importantly, it was not yet time. Instead, she said the words that would define the next several months of her life. "I need time, David. Don't come near me. Sleep in the guest room. I will decide what happens next, not you." What followed was the hardest season of Zara's life, not because of what David did, but because of what she chose to endure in the name of keeping peace. She told herself she was being patient, wise, giving her marriage every possible chance before making an irreversible decision. Her pastor counseled her toward forgiveness. Her mother, old-fashioned in her views, told her, "Every man stumbles once, my daughter. A wise woman fixes her home quietly. She does not burn it down in public." So, Zara did what many women in her position are taught to do. She absorbed it. David did not fully end things with Vivian, not at first. He claimed he was handling it, easing her out, waiting for the right time so the baby wouldn't be affected. Zara, against every instinct she carried, allowed this slow unraveling to continue, hoping it would resolve itself with dignity. It did not. Vivian, upon learning that David had a wife, a fact she claimed she hadn't fully understood until months into the pregnancy, did not retreat. She advanced. She began appearing near the house, first at a distance, parked outside, watching. Then closer. She started attending events she knew Zara would be at, standing just close enough to be noticed, her pregnancy growing more visible each month, worn like an accessory rather than a burden. "Does she know I know?" Zara once asked David, after spotting Vivian at her own cousin's baby shower, uninvited, laughing loudly near the gift table. "I don't know what she knows, Zara," David said miserably. "She doesn't listen to me anymore, Zara. She says if I take care of her, she doesn't care about anything else. That sentence would return to Zara later in a very different context with very different meaning. For now, though, Zara decided to do something few women in her position would have the composure to attempt. She sought Vivian out directly. Not to fight her, not to threaten her, but simply to look with her own eyes at the woman who had reshaped her marriage. They met, by Zara's quiet arrangement, at a small cafe far from anyone who would recognize either of them. Vivian arrived confident, hand resting on her belly, sunglasses pushed up into her hair that had clearly been styled for the occasion. "I know why you wanted to meet," Vivian said before Zara could speak. "But I'm not here to apologize. I didn't force him to do anything." "I'm not here for an apology," Zara said calmly. "I have one question. Do you know him, truly know him, not the version of him that buys you dinner and disappears back to a home he already has?" Vivian scoffed. "I know he takes care of me. I know if he gives me money, gives me what I want, I don't need to know anything else. I have my own life. I live with my sister. I don't need his whole story. I need what he provides." Zara studied her for a long moment. There was no shame in Vivian's face, no conflict, only a transactional certainty that unsettled Zara more than jealousy or anger ever could. "You should know something," Zara said, quietly, standing to leave. "A man who lies easily to build one life will lie just as easily to build the next one. Whatever he is showing you now is not the whole truth of him. I hope, for your child's sake, you find that out gently, not the way I did." Vivian only smiled, the same smile she would later wear on the veranda months afterwards, standing in a house she believed would soon be hers. "We'll see," she said. "Maybe I'll get the ending you didn't." Zara left that cafe with a strange, quiet resolve settling over her, replacing the grief she had carried for months. She was done trying to preserve something that both David and Vivian had already, in their own ways, decided to destroy. But before she could act, one more wound arrived, this one from a person who was supposed to be on her side. Mama Beatrice came to visit that same week, and Zara, still raw, made the mistake of hoping her mother-in-law might for once offer comfort rather than commentary. Instead, Mama Beatrice sat in the parlor, sipped her tea, and said the words Zara would never fully forget. "You know, in my day, when a man strayed, it was because his wife had failed to hold him properly. A woman who cannot give her husband peace at home should not be surprised when he finds it somewhere else. This girl he has taken up with, I have heard she is very lively, very warm. Maybe there is something you can learn from her, instead of sitting there looking wounded." Zara sat very still, absorbing the blow she had learned to absorb all the others. "Mama, he lied to me for months. He is having a child with another woman." "And yet, the child is coming," Mama Beatrice said simply, as though that settled the matter. "A man's family grows where it grows, my dear. The wise wife finds a way to remain necessary. The foolish one sits in her pride and watches another woman take her place." She left that afternoon without once asking if Zara was all right, only reminding her to try harder to smile more, the way David's new friend does. It was in that moment, more than any other, that Zara understood something crucial. She was not only fighting to keep her dignity from one woman who mocked her in her own garden, she was fighting a quiet current of dismissal from the very family that was supposed to have welcomed her home. And she resolved then that when the truth finally surfaced about who she really was and everything she had quietly carried for this family without complaint, it would surface for everyone. Not only for David, not only for Vivian, for Mama Beatrice too. She was done watching. It was time to act. Up to this point,
Zara had absorbed the mistress's cruelty in silence. What she wasn't prepared for was who would stand up at a family party and choose the mistress over her in front of 30 witnesses. What happens in the next few minutes is the exact moment this story stops being about one betrayal and becomes about two. The final unraveling began at a family event, David's mother's 60th birthday celebration, held at a rented event hall filled with relatives, colleagues, and, to Zara's genuine shock, Vivian herself, 7 months pregnant, seated near the front as though she had every right to be there. David had not invited her. He would swear this years afterwards, and perhaps it was even true. Vivian had simply decided that a public event was the correct battlefield to claim her place. Halfway through the celebration, as Zara stood near the back speaking quietly with an aunt, Vivian approached her loudly, deliberately, in front of at least 30 witnesses. "You must be the wife," Vivian said, voice pitched to carry. "I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. This is David's child, and soon this will be my family too." The room fell into the particular silence of collective second-hand embarrassment. And then, to the shock of every relative present, Mama Beatrice rose from her seat of honor, walked directly past her own son, past her daughter-in-law of 3 years, and took Vivian's hands in hers. "Come, come," Mama Beatrice said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear, guiding Vivian to a chair near the front. "A woman carrying my grandchild should not be standing at the back like a stranger. Sit here, my dear, where the family can see you properly." It was, in its own quiet way, worse than anything Vivian herself had said, because Vivian's cruelty, at least, Zara had expected. Her own mother-in-law's public betrayal, choosing, in front of 30 witnesses, the comfort of a pregnant mistress over the dignity of the wife who had served this family faithfully for 3 years, caught in a place Zara had not braced for. Zara did not raise her voice, she did not cry. She simply looked at Vivian, then at Mama Beatrice settling her into the seat of honor, then at David, who stood frozen, saying nothing, doing nothing, offering his wife no defense in a room full of people who had known her since her wedding day. And she understood with total clarity that she was not being betrayed by one person, but quietly abandoned by an entire family who had decided long before this evening that her silence made her the easiest one to sacrifice. "Congratulations on your child," Zara said, calm as still water. "I hope it teaches you something valuable about the man you are building a family with." She turned and walked out of the hall. She did not go home that night. She went to her father's house. Chief Adeyemi, now 71, silver-haired but sharp as ever, took one look at her daughter's face and set aside the newspaper he'd been reading. "Tell me," he said simply. She told him everything. The affair, the pregnancy, the months of quiet endurance, the public humiliation that evening. Her father listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening only once when she described David's silence in that hall. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You have given him more patience than most men deserve," he said finally. "I told you at your wedding to watch him when the truth finally revealed itself. You have watched long enough, Zara. What do you want to do?" Zara felt something settle inside her. Not rage, but resolve, cold and clear as glass. "I want a divorce," she said. "And I want him to understand fully everything he actually built his humiliation on top of." Her father smiled, the way a general smiles when a long campaign finally reaches its decisive hour. "Then let us begin, properly this time." What happened over the following weeks was not loud. It did not need to be. Zara filed for divorce quietly through her father's legal team, the same team that had handled contracts worth billions without ever appearing in a tabloid. There were no public accusations, no dramatic press conferences, Just documents, precise and final, delivered to David at his office. It was only when David opened those documents that the second truth of their marriage became visible to him. The house was not his. It never had been. It was owned outright and had always been owned outright by Zara Adeyemi, daughter of Chief Adeyemi, founder of the Adeyemi Maritime Group, a company David's own firm had done business with for years without ever realizing the woman he married each evening held a significant stake in it. He sat in his office, staring at the paperwork, and understood, far too late, precisely what kind of woman he had spent 3 years quietly underestimating, and precisely what kind of foundation he had actually been standing on without ever knowing it. He called her, frantic, that same evening. "Zara, why didn't you tell me? All this time, why?"
"Because my father taught me something important," Zara said calmly. "A man who marries you for love should treat you no differently on the day he learns the truth than he did the day before he knew it. You showed me exactly who you were, David, not when I hid the truth, but when you betrayed a woman you believed had nothing. Imagine what you would have done to a woman you knew had everything." There was nothing he could say to that, because she was right and they both knew it. The divorce was finalized within 2 months, swiftly, cleanly, without the drawn-out battles David's lawyer had hoped to manufacture, because there was nothing to fight over. The house was Zara's. The savings David believed were theirs had in truth largely come from Zara quietly covering shortfalls in his salary for years, a fact even she hadn't fully disclosed to her own father until now. David was given 30 days to vacate the home. He asked in their final conversation if he could at least keep the car. "The car is registered in my name too," Zara said simply. "But take it. I don't need it back. I only need my peace back, David. And that you've already given me, whether you meant to or not." Zara had already taken back her house and her name. But there were 2 people still waiting to find out what they'd actually lost. One found out through an empty bank account. The other found out through an empty bed. What happens to each of them next is not the same lesson, and that's exactly the point. David moved in with Vivian 3 weeks before her due date into a small rented flat that felt to him like a demotion he hadn't expected to feel so sharply. He had grown used to a life of quiet comfort, a life he now understood had never truly been his to take credit for. Vivian, for her part, adjusted quickly to the reality that David without Zara's house was simply David, a mid-level manager with modest savings and no empire hiding behind him. The affection that had once poured so easily from her began almost immediately to dry up. She complained that the flat was too small, that David didn't earn enough, that she had expected, based on his confidence and the comfortable life he'd once described, something far grander than what remained once the illusion had been stripped away. "You told me you had money," she snapped one evening, heavily pregnant and exhausted. "You told me you could take care of me." "I do take care of you," David said, defeated. "I'm doing everything I can." "Well, it's not enough," Vivian said and turned away from him in bed. The same bed in which months earlier she had whispered about naming ceremonies and futures. When their daughter was born, David expected the child to soften things. Instead, it seemed to harden Vivian further. She grew colder, more transactional, treating David increasingly like household staff rather than a partner, expecting him to cook, to clean, to manage the baby through sleepless nights while she rested, complained, and increasingly disappeared for hours at a time, always vague about where she'd been. "You ruined my life," she told him once, in the middle of an argument over an unpaid bill. "I could have had someone better, someone who actually had something to offer instead of pretending." David, standing in a kitchen far smaller than the one he'd once called home, said nothing, because there was truly nothing left to say. He had traded a woman who quietly built an empire beside her father to a woman who now measured his worth in what remained after the illusion collapsed. 4 months after the birth of their daughter, Vivian did something that closed the circle with brutal poetic precision. She left. She packed a single bag, took whatever cash David had in the house, told her sister she was done playing house with a broke man, and left their daughter behind with David. The same way, in her own words to Zara at that cafe months earlier, she had once dismissed the idea of needing to know the whole story of a man so long as he provided. David was left alone in a small rented flat with an infant daughter, a diminished salary, and the full, undiluted weight of every decision he had made. There was one more reversal still to come. Mama Beatrice's health, the same fragile health David had confided in with Zara on the night they met, had for years been quietly supported by the money David no longer had. Money that had in truth always traced back to the comfortable life Zara's inheritance made possible. Without the house, without the stability of that marriage, David could no longer afford his mother's medication, let alone the private clinic she had grown accustomed to. It was Mama Beatrice herself who eventually came to Zara's gate, not with the confidence she carried into that birthday hall, but with the slow, careful steps of a woman who had finally run out of people to look down on. "I said things I should not have said," she told Zara quietly, unable to fully meet her eyes. "I chose the comfort of that girl's smile over the loyalty you gave this family for 3 years. I did not understand until everything fell apart what kind of woman I had actually pushed away." Zara listened without interrupting, the same patient silence she had once offered her father, her husband, her marriage. "I am not angry with you anymore, Mama, but I hope you understand now what I have always known. The people who choose comfort over loyalty rarely get to keep either one in the end." She helped arrange, quietly and without fanfare, for Mama Beatrice's continued care, not because the older woman deserved it, but because Zara had decided long ago that her own dignity would never be measured by how small she made others feel in return. Let us return now to where this story began. To the veranda, to the yellow dress, to the words Vivian once spoke with such certainty. "Enjoy watching from the outside, madame. This house will be mine soon." 9 days after that afternoon, it was Vivian who stood in that same driveway. Not glowing, not certain, not laughing, but tired, thinner than her arrogance had ever let her appear, holding a bag with broken zippers, asking the security guard if Madame might spare a taxi fare, because she had nowhere left to go and no one left to call. Zara was informed. She came to the gate herself. The two women looked at each other, across a distance far shorter than the one that had separated them the day Vivian mocked her from a garden chair she had no right to sit in. "I heard about David and your daughter. I'm sorry it happened this way." Vivian, for the first time since Zara had known her, did not have a clever answer. Her eyes were red, her composure entirely gone. "I didn't know he had nothing," she said finally, voice cracking. I thought I was choosing the better life." Zara looked at her for a long moment, not with triumph, because triumph was never what she wanted, but with the quiet, tired compassion of a woman who understood, better than most, what it cost to be deceived by a man who dressed his lies as love. She reached into her purse, took out enough money for a taxi and a few days' meals, and pressed it into Vivian's hand. "Take care of your daughter," Zara said simply. "She didn't choose any of this. None of us really did." She turned and walked back toward the house, Her house, the one she had built, protected, and finally reclaimed, leaving Vivian standing exactly where she once stood to mock her, though everything about that spot had changed.
2 years later, Zara sat on that same veranda, the same chair, the same afternoon light falling gold across the garden, but everything around her had grown into something new. She had expanded her father's company into new markets, quietly, without ever needing headlines to prove her worth. She had fallen in love again, slowly, carefully, with a man named Emeka, a widower with kind eyes and no interest whatsoever in what her surname could offer him, because by the time he met her, he already knew exactly who she was and loved her anyway. He sat beside her now, reading a book, occasionally glancing up just to watch her face in the afternoon light, the way a man looks at someone he has no intention of ever underestimating. Somewhere across the city, David worked a smaller job than the one he'd once held, raising a daughter alone, occasionally staring at old photographs of a life he had once dismissed as not enough, not understanding until it was gone precisely how much it had actually held. Zara did not think of him often anymore. When she did, it was without bitterness, only the quiet clarity of a woman who had learned, at great cost, one final truth she now carried like an inheritance of her own. The ones who mock you for what you appear to have often have no idea what you are patient enough to build. And the ones who underestimate your silence rarely survive the moment it finally speaks. Here's my real question, and I want specific answer. Who do you think betrayed her was? The mistress who mocked her to her face? Or the mother-in-law who smiled at that mistress in front of the whole family? Comment the mistress if you think open mockery is worse. Comment the mother if you think a quiet betrayal from someone who's supposed to protect you cuts deeper. And if you've ever had a mother-in-law choose someone else's comfort over your loyalty, tell me what happened in one sentence. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Inspired Folktales, and tap the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Join us again for another unforgettable story. Until next time, stay inspired.